트랙 A의 첫 번째 섹션인
The
디지털
first
플랫폼
session,
시대의 데이터
its
보안입니다.
topic is the digital
트랙 A의
security
첫 번째
of the digital
섹션의 차장을
platform
맡아주실 분은
age.
이성엽
I'd like
회장님이십니다.
to introduce you, Chairman
이성엽
이상엽, Korea Data
회장님께서는
Law and
현재
Policy
한국데이터법
Society.
정책학회 회장, 한국공법학회 부회장, 고려대학교
He is
기술교육대학원
also
교수,
chairing at other
고려대학교
institutions and as well
기술법정책센터
as
센터장을 맡고
academic
계십니다.
institution.
차장을 맡아주실
Thank you very much for
이성엽
your
한국데이터법
participation in this session.
큰 박수로
And I'd like to
부탁드리겠습니다.
invite him to the stage with a big round of applause. Thank you.
네, 반갑습니다. 방금 소개받은 이상엽.
Hello, my name is Lee Sang-yeop. As introduced, thank you very much for the introduction.
좋은 행사를 또 개최하는 저 오늘 처음 왔는데요.
This is my first time coming to this KISA organized event, and this topic is quite timely and important, and joined by so many people, industry people. So it's great to see everybody who have joined us.
컨퍼런스가 여러 가지 지금 뭐 법제라든가 정책.
So in terms of the lawmaking and policy, there's a discussion going on, but this particular track is more focused on the technological issues that the actual managers and the developers can face on their frontline work. So I think this topic holds more importance in that sense.
세 가지 지금 세 번의 발표를
We have 3 presentations.
시각점 관리 전략.
So first one, we'll be hearing about vulnerability management strategy for Log4j and data security strategies tailored to private cloud-based, as well as data security in financial My Data era. So it'll be a great opportunity for us to take insights into this industry-specific topics.
패널 토론 같은 것들이 있는데
Usually we have a panel discussion after the presentation, but I think due to time constraint, we're going to only hear from each presenter. So it'll be great if each presenter can make your presentation within 25 minutes so that we can leave several minutes aside for the panel discussion afterwards. So perhaps if you have any questions or comments, it would be great if you can jot them down while you're listening to the presentation so that you can ask those questions afterwards.
첫 번째 발표는
Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Dong-hwan, Chief Business Officer at Liberman, for his presentation on vulnerability management strategy for Log4j for data security.
부동산 박수로 모시겠습니다.
Please welcome him with a big hand.
안녕하세요. 반갑습니다.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dong-hwan. I'm from Liberman.
오늘은 제가 이제 데이터 보안을 위한
My presentation is titled "The Log4j Vulnerability Response and Future Tasks."
아마 이 업을 좀 아시는 분이라면 왜 아직도
Well,
이야기라고
if you are in this industry, I think you'll be wondering why are we still talking about Log4j, because we found this vulnerability at least 6.5 months ago, almost 7 months ago. So
10개 가까이 됐는데
you would be wondering why are we still talking about this?
굉장히 빨리 이슈가 정리될 거라고 예상했습니다.
Well, we expected these problems to be solved quite quickly, but there have been additional issues that have arose lately, and that's why I thought it was worth revisiting this topic.
사이버 팬데믹이라고
So the Log4j,
불렸던 이유는
Log4Shell, this is called Log4Shell
원격
because this was
야기할 수 있는 상황이 됐기 때문에
a library vulnerability. So it's a nickname for vulnerabilities. Log4Shell is a combination of Log4j and shell because you can use the Log4j vulnerability to execute commands.
1.0 릴리즈가 이루어졌고요.
Since the problem arose, the 2.15.0 was released. Actually, the issue was made in 2021 in November, and after that, all around the world, all the IT managers panicked. It was a huge nightmare, and they had to work all throughout the precious weekend.
자산에 대한 조사 그다음에
So there have been a lot of measures that have that were put in place
모든 자산에
to
대해서
resolve
수정 파악을
this.
하고 패치하고
But
검증하는 거는 사실 거의 대부분의 기관에서 이루어지지 않았습니다.
But not all of them actually get into the survey or the examination of all of the
하고 있습니다.
assets because the patch is kind of in between somewhere,
이 이야기가 또 나오게 된 건데요.
and that is why we're talking about this today.
CIS에는 로그 포즈의 취약점이 패치되지 않은 VM의
CIS,
로그 포즈의 취약점
CISA said the Log4j vulnerability has not gone yet, and there was a report about that. And because of this attack, there was a actual attack on the leakage of information, and it says did not apply available patches or workarounds. So there have been a lot of attacks that happened to those devices that did not apply those patches, and because of this vulnerability, the privilege was actually hijacked and the data was leaked. So let's look at some of the statistics. I had some animation, but anyway,
로그 포즈의 취약점을 삭제하고 있는
these are the number of the malicious codes that happened because of the vulnerability. So these malicious codes were being used as the basic methods. And what's at the bottom, this is released by Extra Hop, and it was December 2021 when the vulnerability was found, and then immediately after, there were a lot of scanning attempts. Hundred thousands of attempts being made to exploit such vulnerabilities. So it's like a default for the hackers to use this vulnerability, and a lot of the equipment without the normal workaround or patches. And there are still many equipment that don't have such those workarounds or patches. And one time, because of there was something that I had to do for work, and I had a chance to look at the weblog, and there were still attacks that happened already attacking such vulnerabilities. If you look at the log, and you can see it's like a default for hackers. Everybody tries to exploit this vulnerability. In the past, there were malicious codes for PHP, but these days there are malicious attempts because of this Log4j vulnerability. And if you had any public device that were connected to your device, then I'm sure you've seen some of those attempts. So let's go back to where it all happened. It was expected to be resolved by patching with 2.15.0, which was announced in December 6th, but 3 major vulnerabilities were found consecutively on December 14, 18, and 28. And even after 2.17.1, many people, that version patched up many problems, and during the 3 updates, the IP managers went through very hellish time because of the remote execution or JDBC appender. And all these terms you can look up in other materials if you want. So there are 3 main ways to work around these attacks. Unless you are patched up with the latest update, then you can block this attack by 3 ways. You can remove the JNDI lookup class, or you can upgrade the Java version to patch, or you can use the firewall so that you can unauthorize outbound communication. So what is the third one?
바로
That means
어떤 명령을 바로 실행하는 게 아니고
the vulnerability itself will not run any command, but through the communication, it can receive the Java library,
코드를 실행하게
and then it will run the codes in the library.
차단도 이제 어떤
That's
일에서는
why
유용한 방식이 될수 있어요.
firewall
그러나
can be
이거는
useful in this
맨
sense.
마지막에 있는 건 사실 굉장히 어려운
But what's at the bottom, that's quite difficult because you have to look at all the outbound communications.
그래서 이제 그러면 가장 기초적인 이
So, going back to the basics,
JNDI lookup 클래스를 제거를
by removing JNDI lookup class, how do we get rid of this?
이제 미국 서트에서는 이런
In the American site, this is the release that they announcement they made, and this is what the Korean site made an announcement. And you would think that, oh, this is easy. All you have to do is run this command.
생각할 수도 있겠지만 이게 이제 실제로
But in fact,
굉장히 어렵습니다.
this is very difficult because
이게 이제 러시아의
if you see, this is the Matryoshka dolls, the Russian dolls, and if you open it, there's a smaller one, you open it, there's a smaller one inside the dolls.
뭐 자르 파일이라든지 와르 파일
So,
같은 경우에는
files like jar or war files in the Java. So jar has been inserted into another jar, into another jar, into another jar.
구조가 되어 있어요.
So it's a nested structure,
실제로
which means
우리가 어떤 이 명령을 실행한다고 해서
even if you run this command, that doesn't mean that you'll be able to detect anything.
실제로는 안에 봤더니
Because inside,
이제 자르 파일을
there's another jar inside the jar.
그렇기 때문에 우리가 이거를 어떻게 이제 탑재하고 있는지
So we
파악하는
have, it's very difficult for us to get a clear picture on what exactly is going on.
이렇게 이제
So this is how it looks like.
뭐 DB를 연결하기 위해서 JDBC 드라이버를 쓴다.
If you use a JDBC drive for the DB,
이런 식으로
within the drive,
삽입되어 있는 경우들이 굉장히 많이 있습니다.
there are these nested files inside the JDBC
사람이
drive.
수동으로 해서는
So there's no way that a human can do it manually, accurately,
사람이 할 수 있는 거는
and the amount is just so massive. So it's not a task that a human being can take on. And another thing is that
넣는 경우도 있거든요. 그러면
if the package name is changed like this,
이 명령으로 아예
then
찾아낼
with this command, there's no way that you can find this because the package name has already changed.
코드를 대조를
Then you have to check the bytecode
삽입되어 있는 로우
to determine the actual version,
를 찾아내야 합니다. 그래서
and that's what you have to do. So now,
원으로 튀었어요. 로우4j 1에
what happened afterwards? Now log4j1 has also become at the center of the attention,
수많은 이슈들이
and
끄집어졌습니다.
all the previous problems have surfaced.
원이 2014년
Log4j1 became EOS in the past, so it had not been updated. So many organizations have notified to update the version from 1 to 2. Thankfully, the Log4j1's developer started another project on the Log4j1. So now you don't need to upgrade from 1 to 2, but you can put in the reload 4j. So you can just replace the previous Log4j1 with reload 4j. So those who are using Log4j1, it'll be great if you can take this into your consideration. Like I said, it's not a task that human being can do. So now the machine's got to do it. There are two things that the machines can do. One is a network scanning, and the other is system scanning. Network scanning is a technique that means that you will be scanning all the equipment all at once. But with network scanning is that they use pausing methodology, and they cannot identify the attack surface because they follow the inputted principles, and it's not like they scan the whole thing. It's convenient, but there are some downfalls.
그리고 이제 시스템 스캐닝은
And Full-han is the one that came up with network scanning. But now system scanning, that means it's a scanner that scans the whole system. That means you have to scan each and every system, and it takes effort.
우리가 이제 흔히 사용하고 있는 빅픽스 같은 배포 시스템을 이용하면
But if you use the
시스템 스캐너를
deployment solutions such as BigFix, then it'll make your life a lot easier. And it can ensure that you can scan all the systems. So it can execute a thorough, all-around system scans on all files. And even if the structure is nested like this, it will dig into all the nested files, and it will look for and detect all the vulnerabilities. And so in this case, and it can also compare the bytecodes so that it can detect. So we came up with a CVE 2021-44228, and also Alyak came up with another system scanner. Last year, around December 12th, we released the first version, and that was for Log4j2. But then afterwards, there were requests so that the scanner can scan for Log4j version 1. The logback, that means that it's a library based on Log4j. There were some additional requests for our scanner. Now, we are providing a solution that can scan everything thoroughly and also take action. Log4j1, 2, and all these are covered, and it supports JDK7. So Linux and everything, so all the OS, everything can be supported by the solution. And it can execute temporary measures. Even without the metadata, based on MD5, it can detect for Log4j version, even if the package name has changed. This solution can detect. The CPU's load limit, that's very important. When you scan an OS, the scanner, if the scanner runs on the OS, and then the load will be too burdensome. So you have to restrict the load. So I would say, 100 or 1,000 files per second. So you can make that kind of customization if you need. And HTTPS report transmission support is also available. There's a Logpresso watch. It's in our cloud and where you can receive the services. But if you have any SIM or integrated log system, then you can also receive the report via our solution. Now, after releasing in 11th of December, our program has been downloaded all around the world 670,000 times. This is a result that we take great pride in. And there were KISA and Qualys and Google. Other competitors also released such very similar solutions, but there's nothing that can compete with us. We are top of our game, and some of those downloads were done by companies and academic institutions in the US and Europe and government agencies. So they also made an announcement to use our product to scan their stakeholders' system. But each company has their own system, so they use our solution so that they can gather statistics.
한국 솔루션조차 없는 경우들이
if it's a big company. But for a smaller and mid-sized companies, they don't usually have their own solution, so they can use our
취약점을
solution on cloud so that they can verify the log4j and then they can take a look at the statistics. And if you run this, so on this PC, on which file, what log4j library, this version is available, so such vulnerabilities have been detected. This is all for free of charge. So if you have not verified any log4j vulnerability, then you can go to our website log4j watch and you can use it for free. We give license to up to 10 units for free, but if you want to scan a lot of equipment, then you can contact us on our chat box at our company so that you can receive more license. So when you run the scanner, this is what it happens. This is the result. That's the report and how many vulnerable libraries have been found. So this is how you use our solution. Well, there are some things that we really need to think about. Log4j vulnerability is something that well, the log4j is something that we have been using as default, like a library. Even the big companies, they just blindly depend or trust the open source developers and also sponsors, open source project sponsors. I'm not just talking about Korea, but all around the world. This is a universal problem. So you don't verify the source and just use it just because that's your sponsor. Now, JNDI lookup, that was another problem. That was commissioned in December 2013, and that has been overlooked for about 10 years. But at conferences like Black Hat, they already discussed this risk, and there's a potential of being dangerous, but it took us to resolve this for too long. But we were able to solve this on physical hardware by scanning the hardware. But now, if we are faced with this type of problems, like trying to control hundreds of thousands of endpoints, then how are we going to do that? So we have been verifying the log4j and then getting the report and detecting the vulnerabilities. We were able to do that, but if you have so many numerous endpoints in your company, then how in the world are you going to handle that effort and that scope? So that means that when you adapt the software, then software bill of materials need to be managed, and you need the necessary capability to achieve that. And if you use any software, then you have to know you have to know your capability in terms of assessing the open source that's being used in the software. So Log4Shell and Spring4Shell, these are some of the latest problems that we're facing. And if you go back in time, there was a heartbleed. And OpenSSL, there were consecutive problems, so there have been recommendations to install patches and updates. When the software is made, then the software uses several open sources, then you have to really identify which open source has been used for which part of the software. We talked about the nested structure, like this diagram.
그 각사의 벤더들이
Each
자기들이
company's
라이브러리를
vendor,
쓰고 있음에도 불구하고
even if they use a Log4j
스캐너를 딱
software,
돌려보니까 우리가 쓰고 있었네요라고 파악하게 되는
they didn't even know that they were using it. They only found out after they scanned it.
OEM을 관리하는 일이 아마 뭐 한 1, 2년 정도
And
지나면
after 1 or 2 years,
현재로서는
I think it'll be kind of a habit for everybody to do this scanning and managing the SBOM. But right now, this is one of the challenges. For the commercial software, they provide the patches for the available software, and the downloads that you do right now is free from the old problems. But if there's any open source that you received for your old projects, or if you install the results from your old project and that was a Java application, then before you use it, you have to make sure that you verify the Log4j vulnerabilities. Still, there are numerous links
취약한 버전이라고 볼 수 있는 이제 록4j에 많이 링크들이 다 되어 있고
are already linked to the Log4j, so that's exposed to vulnerabilities. So without testing, without examination, there's no way that you can find out. Now, this concludes my presentation, and if you have any question, I'll be happy to take your question after the presentation time and when we have the Q&A afterwards. Thank you very much.
네, 동훈 사무님.
Thank you very much for the insightful presentation.
Log4j 취약점
Log4j vulnerability issue and how we manage and how we fight against it. And you said when we use an open source, we have to find out if there's any technical support available. So that's one consideration that we have to think.
두 번째 발표는 우리 네이버 클라우드 라영선 부장님께서 민간 클라우드 기반의 디지털 플랫폼 맞춤형 데이터 보호 전략에 대해서 발표해 주시겠습니다. 한 25분 정도 부탁드리겠습니다. 박수로 우리 환영해 주시기 바랍니다.
네, 반갑습니다. 네이버 클라우드의 라영선입니다. 네, 최근에 그 새로운 정부가 들어서고 나서 그 디지털 플랫폼 정부 TF가 설립되고 곧 뭐 정식 위원회가 발족될 예정인데요. 그동안 정부가 보안과 관련된 그리고 디지털 플랫폼과 관련된 여러 제도에 대한 검토가 이루어지고 있습니다. 그리고 여러 민간 사업자들의 의견도 청취하기 위해서 간담회도 좀 개최하고 있습니다. 그래서 정부가 그동안 많은 고민을 하고 있었던 부분, 근본 그 국제 정부 뭐 컨퍼런스를 통해서 어떤 고민들을 하고 있고 또 아직 다 결론은 나지 않았지만 어떤 계획들을 갖고 있는지 들어볼 수 있는 좋은 자리를 주최해 주신 것 같습니다. 또 저에게도 발표할 기회를 주셔서 주최 측에 다시 한번 감사드리고요. 저희 네이버 클라우드는 이러한 정부의 그 정책에 발맞추어서 클라우드 사업자로서 디지털 플랫폼을 갖추고 있는 클라우드 사업자로서 그 클라우드로 올라오는 데이터를 안전하게 지켜야 될 어떤 미션이 주어졌다고 생각을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 저희가 디지털 플랫폼을 운영하는 사업자로서 데이터를 어떻게 지키려고 하는지 같이 말씀드리도록 하겠습니다.
So I'm going to tell you what we're going to do as a digital platform business. We have a total of three different categories. Number one, we have to look at what the purpose and the security threats are in the digital platform space. And because the threats are going to be heightened, we need to come up with measures. And then secondly, we will also look at data protection technologies that are customized towards digital platforms. We also have to look at security threat responses during the digital platform era. So far, the cloud has been directly intertwined with the life of citizens, and we have been supporting the digitalization of our citizens. And despite the COVID pandemic that spread, cloud has been growing steadily. And when it comes to establishing a digital government cloud platform, I believe the cloud technology itself is going to be very contributing. Before the COVID pandemic, digital platform and cloud has been increasing and growing by 10%, but after the pandemic, we've been growing by 35% per year. I wouldn't say that this quantitative growth has much meaning. I think it's meaningful that we prove the usefulness of the cloud technologies. Workers were able to work remotely, students were able to be in class at their home. And for those who are distributing goods and services, we were able to order food and we were able to deliver our products to our clients due to and thanks to the technology of cloud. And for us to get vaccination, we were able to use the cloud technology to book and reserve our inoculation process. So I believe that depending on the demand and the supply and the environment, cloud came in and helped us to execute different missions according to the demand. And I think the fact that cloud is something that we can adjust the size and the need is what's important. And now we're going to look at the purpose and the aim of digital platform government. We are going to set up an environment and space where we can talk about what is needed in the society and what changes we need to bring in. There are purposes and goals of the digital platform government, and mainly there are 7 different items on the left side. And for these specific goals, what can we support as a platform service provider? We map these solutions to individual purpose and goal that the government is pursuing. And before going to specific details, I'm going to briefly touch upon the security threats that the digital platform has. The fact that the roles of digital platform is growing is something that's positive. But at the same time, that means externally it will be more vulnerable as a target of hackers. One could be ransomware attack. I think you're very familiar with this concept, so I'm not going to add any special explanation to it. Second will be target attack. Whenever there is conflict and tension between nations and around diplomatic relations, there is a chance that a target attack could occur, and this is to cause confusion around the nation and around the world. And of course, in the digital platform, there will be these types of attacks. Third would be as the data size grows, the aftermath and the losses is going to grow accordingly. And also, things are getting more complex. We have lack of experts and professionals. Because so many people are interest holders, there could be human errors which can cause a catastrophic situation. And number 5 would be how it's really difficult to manage the supply chain, because many are, again, taking part in the system, and the weakest link and the most vulnerable spot is going to be subject to attack. So it's not something that you can do alone. We have to make sure that everyone who's participating in the system is secure. Last one would be how it's easy to use resources and delete the resources. But even though this itself is a positive trait, it could be misused because we have a lack of tracking of our history and the use. So we have to be reminded of these facts when we plan our digital platform. Number 1, let's move on to the second part. We think we need to look at and analyze compliance, and we need to comply with the practice. This is the biggest pain point our clients have. When you convert from on-premise to cloud environment, security environment changes, and we have to make sure that the same security level is maintained in the cloud environment as well. Compared to CSP, when you do in-house environments, CSP should be ready so that they give adequate and appropriate explanation to our client about the digital space and the security space. And as we went through COVID-19, we were able to provide remote support, and cloud is the same. As the cloud environment changes, the response measures or support measures have to change as well. We have been actively analyzing financial compliance, public compliance, medical compliance, and digital platform government compliance as well. And now I'm going to talk about the special law to be legislated in the Korean society. Among many different laws and acts, what would be the areas, legal areas and requirements that could be related and corresponding to the operation of the digital platform government? You have to make sure what range and what roles and responsibilities of each stakeholder has. And at the same time, while we prepare for the digital platform, we have to make sure there's no data that leaks to the outside of the system. And next, I would like to talk about the provision of SAS and SECAS for smart cooperation. First, there are some benefits of using SAS instead of making everything in-house. So far, SIE, which is internal or in-house establishment system. But if you look at the project itself, designing, development, maintenance, repair, it will take multiple years, and it's more of a mid and long-term approach. And this particular system is only tailored and customized to a specific company, so interoperability is damaged. As a result, compared to this system, if you're going to go for a SaaS, which is a subscription model of software, it's going to be much quicker, and depending on the change of the demand, you can either expand it or scale it down. And for AI or other technologies, the newest and updated technologies can be featured in very quickly. So I believe that most of the organizations are going to go for a SaaS model. That means, as you can see from the joint responsibility model, that means cloud operators are going to take more responsibility, bigger responsibility. So the service provider will come up with a contractual obligation, and whenever an accident happens, the CSP has to be in charge of correcting the mistake. So if you look at the data side, who will be the person who would manage and collect data? So what does CSP have to think? When the client manages data, we have to provide a SECAS as a method and the means for the client. I think SECAS users are going to be curious. How much data did I create? What type of data is personal data? What part is encrypted, or which part of data is not encrypted? These questions are going to come from our client, so you should be ready for the answers. And even though there is going to be user agreement system, the CSP has to create different and diverse user agreement terms of use pages so that your client can gather and collect agreements as in many different environments. And as a result, I think it's our responsibility to give SECAS services to the market and the industry. Now let's move on to building a safe infrastructure. The fact that there will be central infrastructure and centralization is going to be pursued. Of course, centralization will occur. That doesn't mean we can't distinguish data from each other or one another. Even though it's a cloud environment, individual organization is going to want their own space. That's why we have to make sure we have network separation, we have adequate access and authorization, so that only who have rights and authorities can access a specific data. And as you can see from this slide, network separation and access control is needed. There's a concept called virtual private cloud. If we provide this virtual private cloud in the subnet, they can cut and split subnetworks and then create virtual instance. So per subnet level, network access will be given, and then there will be another type which is network-based access. Those options have to be provided to your clients. Next, I'm going to talk about external network integration. You can use VPN or IPsec or a separate cable to be able to be integrated with external networks. Third, we have to be able to manage external access and authorization by using sub-accounts or SSL VPN products. And fourthly, we have to save important data by using archiving features. We should be able to provide various storage products, and as a result, data can be stored securely. And because they want to have data, we should give export features by using object storage. And because some data is going to be stored long term, we should be able to provide archive storage as well. And fifth, we have to make sure that we build a system and operate a system where usability is guaranteed. We should provide physically separated zones so that resources are allocated accordingly by building a safe infrastructure. And system database backup has to be supported. And next, we have to be able to send traffic by using API gateway that is optimized for security. That means API gateway communications have to be allowed. So instead of individually calling in or invoking API, you have to use centralized system. And the API gateway should be able to manage authorization and access control. And earlier, we talked about safe infrastructure buildup, and we also briefly mentioned API's protection measures. As you can see, as the cloud is becoming more common, APIs are being used more heavily as well. And the digital government is going to likely to use APIs more and more. The reason why I say this is because the purpose and the aim of the digital platform government would be adapting to the needs and requirements of citizens. They pursue agile operation. And if you look at different stakeholders underneath the digital platform government, it seems that the government services are going to be all connected together. As a result, we can safely expect that the API use is going to increase. And relevant measures have to be taken. But there are some precautions that we have to take as we use APIs. You can see that security threats related to APIs are coming into our scenes, and actual data leakage accidents are occurring. According to Expert Cloud Security Threat Landscape Report, 2 out of 3 accidents were in cloud, and you can see that compared to the last year, API exploitation has increased by 41%, and you can easily find relevant cases in Korea as well. So if that is the case, how are we going to respond to the API-related security threats? When you say API security threats, it's related to app. Overall, app security has to be improved. So it's quite vague, it's quite general, so it's hard to be pointy. So now I kind of laid out the response measures for API security threats. If possible, you should be able to use all 5 plans, but because we can't have unlimited investment for every single area, at least we should be trying to target meeting the requirements stated in the law. If you are dealing with private information and data, you should look at the Personal Information Protection Act. And there are different usages of APIs. There are internally used APIs, APIs provided to clients, there are APIs provided to your partners. So if you are using APIs to provide information to your partner, which is your third-party partnership, you have to follow and abide by the Personal Information Protection Act. There are 3 different ways: authorization, access control, and encryption. For these all 3 protection measures, you have to do all 3 of them if you're going to provide data to your partner. And now moving on to creating a data distribution system that is safe. The government said they're going to open and disclose public data more and more. As a result, data communication, computation, and interaction is going to be more frequent. So according to the data life cycle, we have to make sure that we have adequate protection measures. If you look at the image, there's a public institution on the left, cloud, a CSP on the right side. We have to make sure that when the data goes to the CSP side, And when data is created in the public organization, when this data is stored, when this data is encrypted and decrypted, depending on the needs, when the public server is going to express those data and how this data is going to be moved on the internet, when the service is totally done and we are supposed to dispose this data, we have to make sure that relevant measures are all in place. And now I would like to talk about data security for AI. In the digital platform era, I believe one of the most important or successful factors would be how we can better utilize AI. Among a number of data, what would be necessary for citizens so that we can actually generate benefits towards them? And we should be able to access as many data as possible. As a result, CSP should provide good quality data and make sure that AI is not misrun or exploited. We have to make sure that AI does not infringe the rights of human basic rights and privacy. In the case of Naver Clova AI team, we know the importance. As a result, in the international community, which is called ACMP, we had a workshop under the theme of AI ethics. And now I would like to move on to privacy data protection. There are many different participants in the digital platform, not just CSP. I would say the government is a participant, regular corporations are also participants. Sometimes they're going to be the cloud service provider. They'll be also dealing or handling privacy data, and there would be consignees of public or private data as well. So they have to understand each and every role that they're going to take over. If you're going to be a developer, whenever designing your service, you have to make sure that privacy philosophy is reflected. And we have to make sure that during the privacy data collection process, there's agreement, user agreement process included. And because CSPs are going to deal with privacy data protection systems, you should be able to design it properly. And if you're going to be the consignee or delegates of private data, you should do the managing role. So you have to make sure that there are separate R&R clearly described during the contractual process. And now I would like to talk about privacy data protection. As you can see, it requires a ton of experts, professionals, and investments. So it's very difficult for a mom and pop store to be adequately equipped with a privacy data protection system. And CSPs have service operation tools and ISP engagements as well, and we do have know-how and expertise. So I believe that CSPs should help the government or corporates or partners so that they can establish a privacy data protection system. As a way, we can provide products to them, or we can provide seminars or consulting services or workshops to these stakeholders. And in the meantime, if you look back on the security solutions so far, people say that we have been only focusing on physical area, or it's just not customized or too simple and generic. I think SECIS, many diverse and customized plans have to be poured into the market. And for this to happen, CSP, MSP, and third-party solutions have to work together and utilize the joint partnership. And for the SECIS market to be settled down smoothly, the government has to provide support. Now I'm going to move on to digital platforms' security threat responses to make sure that the platform runs smoothly. First, let me talk about ransomware responses. There could be three main areas. Number one is continuous prevention activities. Second is real-time threat detection. And third is backup and restoration process establishment. For the prevention activities, you have to be able to distinguish your assets to be protected. You have to have access control system. You have to monitor and manage cloud environment vulnerabilities. And moving on to real-time access control, no matter how secure your system is, you can never 100% be proof of malicious code. So you have to design a backup system in case a disaster or emergency happens. And now I'm going to talk about the provision of traceable platform. As I said, cloud assets can be easily created and deleted. And if you exploit this, it could work and serve as a security threat. As a result, audit process has to be set up. There will be three main audit process. Number one is account management. Number two is network monitoring. And number three is system monitoring. And for this to happen, I would say that you have to secure visibility of data. And number two, you have to make sure that dashboards are created so that multiple activities can be shown at the same time. And next, going on to how to support safe settings and configuration. During the beginning stage, default was cloud settings error were disclosed. All the people who were using cloud had a disclosed mode, and because of massive data accidents, we now set this as non-disclosure as default. But despite this measure, there have been ongoing security accidents. We should provide security guides to your clients. We have to make sure that it's not disclosed, the basic settings, and you have to provide hardening as well. And when you provide a product, we have to make sure that you have gone through hardening, which is where you set everything for them by default. And you should also provide measures to monitor and verify risk assessment. And as you can see, the risk is expanding, things are becoming more complicated, and cloud management as a result is going to be more complicated as well. So we do need to engage in multiple activities. If you look on the right side, those are compliance requirements by the government and the authorities. But even without thinking about these different certifications, I think corporations themselves have to be voluntarily engaging in such practice. Digital platform is aiming for 24/7 around-the-clock service. What does that mean? That means we are vulnerable and exposed to hackers' attacks 24/7. As a result, we have to provide and design a control and monitoring system. There will be 2, 3 different layers to protect the system. And in case an emergency happens, we have to have an external partnership system and report system as well. And threat information has to be shared between all the stakeholders. We have to engage in joint drills and practices so that we do not lose track of the trend. Thank you very much. This is everything from my presentation. We talked about customized security responses and measures catered to the digital platform. Because I squeezed in so much information within the limited amount of time, I don't think I handled specific measures and practices. I believe that the digital platform government, when this is set up and being operated, we can have another chance to discuss relevant matters. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Director La Young-san, for your great presentation. As you all know, a government organization is going to convert their system to cloud by the year of 2025. And especially the K-Digital Platform government is in charge of making public system and public administration effective. And this is closely related to the use of cloud technologies by the government. There are many data protection issues as we utilize cloud in the private sector, such as in the use of AI, artificial intelligence, and we were able to learn a lot from his presentation. Once again, thank you very much, and let's move on.
Now I'd like to invite Mr. Jongho from TOS Bank, Data Security and Financial by Data Era. Please welcome him with a big hand.
네, 안녕하세요. 토스뱅크 보안
Hello, my name is Jongho. I'm the team leader at the TOS Bank, and my title is Data Security in the Era of Financial My Data.
데이터 플랫폼 시대 흐름에 대해서 간략하게 살펴보면
Now, just to see the
1940년대
trend,
컴퓨터가 최초로
in the 40s the computer was invented, and in the 80s a personal computer has been distributed for the first time, and the computer revolution started. After the computer revolution, when the computers got networked and the internet revolution started. And then the digital asset in the PC has been accumulated, and that's now where we are, the digital revolution. In the era of digital revolution has been pushed forward with Corona pandemic. That's because COVID-19 made things normal, made the non-contact trend as a normal thing. So this data has been accumulated all around the world, and the companies stored these data, and the competition over digital revolution has boosted. So digital competition has become one of the key factors that ensures corporate competitiveness. In the past, companies, while accumulating data, they focused on the security of the data. Now, protecting the information, securing the data was directly related to the survival of the company. Now, we are living in the era where data sharing is more important because the data needs to be used. And data economy, data sharing, and this data economic ecosystem has been revitalized, led by advanced countries. There are three categories under this ecosystem. There are three ecosystems. First of all, the interface-based ecosystem, and aggregator-based, and my data-based. The interface-based ecosystem, the API ecosystem, within this ecosystem, each companies can be connected very easily, and every time there is the connection, then the complexity goes up, and the more connection will happen. Now, with the aggregators model, there's a platformer who is also an aggregator, will aggregate the data from each party and then from the users, and they will use that for corporate uses. But now, among the platformers, the data is not being shared, so user can only use the data that person is subscribed to. Now the third model, that's my data model. This platform does not belong to any institution. User is at the center of this model, and the user actively uses the data. So this is a user-oriented model. Once the My Data platform has been boosted, and which means that individuals' need can be satisfied. And this My Data model ensures the sovereignty of the individual and individual rights. There are three keywords in the data industry: big data, open data, and my data. Big data, as you know, is based on various data available, and it's really about taking insights into the data and analytics of the data. And thanks to big data, the data economy has been boosted. Now with open data, that means without license, all data can be open. And with this ecosystem of open data, the data democracy has been supported. Recently, corporate data or individual data, public data are converged into something which is called My Data, which will create other types of values. Now, what kind of change happened after My Data? In the
개인이
past,
저장한 데이터임에도 불구하고
individuals, even though those
기업이
data are
개인의
stored by
데이터를
those individuals,
소유함으로써
corporations
기업의 의사결정에
owned the
활용하고
individual data
개인의 영향을 미치지
and
않는
while making their
기업의
own decisions.
기업으로
And
어떤
their
우선순위가
decisions
기울어진
did not influence the
운동장에서
individuals. So that
결정이
means there was
기업에서
a
이전됐다고 볼수 있을 것
unlevel
같습니다.
playing
그러나
field between
지금
individuals
현재는
and corporations.
마이데이터가
Now,
법제화되면서
my data
데이터
has been
탐법으로 인하여
made
개인이
into
개인 데이터에 대해서
law.
소유권을
That means the
주장하고 자기
individual
결정권을
can
주장함으로써
have rights over
기업이
their
가지고
data.
있는 이점을 개인이
Now,
뺏어왔다고 볼 수
the
있고
benefits or the merits of the data that have been acquired by the companies can now be claimed by individuals, and they are at the agency that uses and manages their own data.
가장 중요한 것은
And here,
상법의 개정으로 볼 수 있을 것 같습니다.
what's important here is the Data
개인의 전송
3
요구권을
Act.
행사할 수가 있고 이러한 전송 요구권에 대해서
And according to this law, the companies are now given the duty of providing all the individual data to those individual users. One of the reasons why the My Data ecosystem has become successful, that's because of the information security.
실증 연구에서 정보 보안이
In
참여하는
the
분들이
survey,
어느 정도 의미가 있다라는 연구들이 발표되고 있습니다.
there have been many studies on the effectiveness of the information security that had impact on My Data ecosystem. And some of the My Data operators experience some leakages of the personal information. When that kind of accident happens, actual clients will become very much afraid of using the My Data service. And once the My Data can spread the data and the information security is a top priority to observe. Now, what is the objective of information security? So if you're in this industry, I think you know what that is. The objective is that integrity, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That means confidentiality is that you have to have the authority, and the integrity, that means you cannot change, and availability is that if you ask for the service, then you will be given the service. And with the basis of these three principles, the information security objectives were established. Then now here, what is the data security objective? Well, they are not that different. Data itself is part of the information asset, and in order to protect the information asset, that means these three CIA have to be ensured in order to ensure the information security. Then what is the confidentiality for the data security? That means unauthorized user cannot have access to the sensitive information, sensitive data. Now, how can we block that? The least privilege and authentication and a strong password and configuration management and monitoring and alarms. For integrity, that means the data cannot be erased or modified without any authority. So that means the transmission device have to be safe, and that safe needs to be certificated. And availability, that means that it needs to be available anytime the user wants. That means that there has to be a backup on the data, and there has to be the twin system. So I would like to go over some of the ways that we can strengthen the security. So first of all, in terms of locating the data's location. So we manage the risk to ensure the data security. The first one is that you have to detect, we have to identify the risk. Before that, there's something else that you have to know, identifying the asset. So what exactly is the data asset that we have to know? So you have to identify that first, and then you have to identify the risk upon it, and then you assess the risk. In the data security, it's important that you identify the data itself. So the data that comes into our company that we store and that we send out. Where exactly is the data, in what form? So identifying all that, that's very important. And when the data has some form, then it's easy to detect. But when that is not formed, then it's not so easy. The mobile application is everywhere, and there are data that can disappear anytime. So it's very important to really know where exactly the data is, and you can categorize into some grades and apply different level of security. Secondly, I think it's important to manage the access privilege. So by grade, the privilege will differ. Especially when there's a user that's been using permanently, then the account has to be rigorously managed, and the minimum privilege has to be given to that account. Thirdly, internal security boundary has to be established. Internally, if the system, if the data and the system coexist within one boundary, then that's outdated. Financial institutes already have very much segregated and small size boundaries. There are different phases and different zones for each purpose, and that there are many different boundaries that make sure that the data will not travel unnecessarily internally. And number 4, maintain encryption. Even if the attacker will infringe in the first level, then if the data is leaked, but then if the data itself is encrypted, then the attacker will not be able to identify the original data. So you have to identify the data, how important that is, and if you've assessed that that's important, then it has to be encrypted, and that encryption needs to be maintained. And doing that ensures it has to be encrypted, all 3 status, when it's coming in and being stored and when it's sent out. And when there's a copy of that encrypted file, then you have to make sure that both the original copy and original file and the copy are tracked and managed. And also, you have to protect the device that's accessed. And device that is the core of the IT these days. And now, whenever the system is connected to the device, then the data inside the device has to be protected, and we have a duty to alert our users about those risks that can involve their devices. Now, you also have to consider the security architecture. And we compare the security when it's execution. When there's a bug during the execution, then you address that. Then it costs you 30 times more expensive than when you address the bug during the designing. Well, because of the agile approach, of course, that cost will not be that big, but still, if you address the bug during the design phase, then you will be able to save a lot of money on those after measures. So there are 10 things that you have to consider to secure the data for my data model.
고객이
First of all, in my data,
자기가 가지고 있는 자기 결정권을 이용해서
the clients has all the rights
크게
on their
세 가지 방법으로
own,
사용할 수 있습니다.
and they can use
첫 번째는 고객이 직접
tap on their
정보
rights by three
제공자에게
things. First is
전송
that
요구를 할 수가 있습니다.
they can ask
두 번째는
the
마이데이터 사업자를
data
통해서
should be sent to somewhere
정보
else.
제공자의
And
정보를
second,
요구할 수가 있으며 세 번째는 마이데이터 외의 사업자를 통해서
it can ask the my data operator to send their data to somewhere else, or the user can ask the other party to send data to my data operator.
정보를 수집하고 수집된 정보를
And
통해서 마이데이터 서비스를 제공받는 형태에 대한 절차를
the-
살펴보도록 하겠습니다.
We have to know how the steps are taken when the transmission of data happens, and they will ask request their individual information to be sent to somewhere else to the my data.
전송 요구권을 전달을 하고
And they will send the right to transmit to the operator, and they will authenticate the ID of the person. There are two ways to authenticate. One is the individual authentication means, and the other is through the integrated authentication institution. Usually, the information provider's data can be collected all at once through integrated authentication institution, or the individual can choose to use the individual authentication means. It's really up to the user. And after authentication through API to my data operator, these data will be sent. And then once the my data operator will receive the data, and then
통합 자산관리 서비스라든지
they will send to other integrated asset manager or information manager can be integrated, and then the services will be finally provided to the end user.
서비스를 이용하면서
The user, while using the My Data service,
마이데이터 종합 포탈이라는 곳에
they
가입하여
will sign up to the integrated portal to find out
조회를 할 수가 있습니다.
how their rights have been, their privilege has been used. So which data has been sent to who,
을 하고자 했는지
and or who wanted to collect data about that person. And all such information is available on the portal.
데이터 보안을 위한 실천 가능한 10가지 항목을 좀 살펴보도록 하겠습니다.
And there are things that we have to do to ensure the data security of the My Data operator. First is encryption.
입장에서
From the point of view of a My Data operator, when the data is collected, and then you have to pick and choose which data to encrypt and the other not to encrypt. And if the data is important enough to be encrypted, then you have to encrypt it. So what you have to look at is that you have to make sure that encryption is used safely, and that
보호할 수 있는 체계를 마련하는 것입니다.
the system has to be in place to make sure the key is encrypted. At Toss Bank,
주센터, 백업센터에 대해서
our services are active base when we provide our service. The active base service is only available when the key and the encryption are unified. When we manage the encryption system, we maintain those two in the major center and the backup center. And in order to do that, a GSLB and load balancer is put in place so that we can manage the traffic. So we are already on top of our game so that we can provide the data anytime we need, and then the service can go to the main center, and then the backup center will also work at the back, and the major center will drive all the traffic, and then the backup center will all do at the back, so that everything goes smoothly with encryption. Now, secondly, the data
개인에게 있기
disposal
때문에
procedure
개인이
establishment.
전송 요구권을 언제든
Now,
처리를 할 수가 있습니다.
that means the user has all the rights over their data. That means they can say, I don't want to give you any of my data. And they will say, dispose my data. And when you get that request, then the My Data operator has to dispose exact data of that person. And the disposal has to happen in an irreversible way. What I mean by that is that technologically, there's no way that you can recover it. In order to dispose it completely, then not just the formal but informal data have to be managed. Only that way you can accomplish total and complete disposal. Third is the data masking application. With the collected data within your working system, this can be used, or when it's used for analysis, then you can only use the data that's useful for the analysis, and you can mask the other data so that the data will be used indiscriminately. 4. Data recovery procedure. In order to continue providing the services, then the data used for the service, when that's damaged or influenced by the hacker, when the system is down, then you have to be able to recover the data. There's the redundancy or backup system can be part of this. But the other 3 principles that I went through can be also used for this. And data leakage prevention measures. So you have to do everything you can to prevent leakage, and you can apply some of the security solutions. DLP solution can be used, and DLP can be either network-based or server-based. 6 is to block external attack. You have to identify where the data is stored, and you have to identify the route for access so that you can put in firewall or in penetration prevention programs should be running. And the 7th, the internal threat measures system have to be established. What I mean by internal threat is essentially human. That means it can be our employee or external employee of our partners. Anyone who has privilege, any users that can use our system. I believe that the security management has to be done more rigorously against external users. But at the same time, you have to make sure that the internal users will not leak the information even by mistake. And 8th, blocking the invasion of malicious code. From the point of view of an attacker, rather than attacking the server, it's easier for them to attack the user. Recently, voice phishing or smishing allowing the malicious code being installed on mobile phones, and that leads to financial accidents. So even without attacking directly on the server, they can attack the user, and they can identify the vulnerable user, and they have them install malicious codes. So for this, we have to come up with the blocking measures. To do that, we can do the penny-based vaccine or pattern-based vaccines can be used. 9th is the API security. In the My Data model, when it's transmitted, API is used. Standard API is used. And During this time, the attackers can penetrate the API. In the past, when there is the web banking, we focused on the web security, but usually those services are done at API. Then you have to make sure that API specific security. So there are many solutions that are applicable to API, so you can pick and choose, or internally you can develop your own considering the API that you use.
마지막으로는 주기적인 점검입니다.
Lastly, periodic
보안
inspection.
정책을 아무리 잘
Security policy can be impeccable, but if the
지속적으로 운영되는 것은
policy that has been created in the beginning is not continued, then you're faced with problems, and it's not easy to continue the integrity of the policy. So you have to make sure that the initial policies are kept and followed.
고객과 금융회사에게
My data
모두 기회를 제공한다고 보고 있습니다.
gives opportunity to both the user and the financial institutions. For users,
중앙에 수집하여
they can collect all these scattered data to the center so that they can take advantage of their data, and the financial institutions can tap onto the aggregated data so that they can come up with diverse services and financial products catered to that user.
마이데이터가 올해 시작한 이후에 약 3개월 동안
Within 3 months after My Data launched, we found out that 2,400 people have subscribed.
마이데이터 사업은
If you just look at the number of the subscribers, we can say that we are on a smooth sail.
마이데이터 서비스가
But
성공적으로 정착하기
in order
위해서는
for the My Data service to take root, then the information security has to be intact for the all time. And when you get certified as the My Data operator, then the vulnerability management has to be done, and there's a checklist for that. However, security has evolved for risk-based security. So you have to be sensitive about those potential risks. So even if you ticked off all the checklists, that doesn't mean that you're okay. You also have to be updated with all the emerging risks so that you can come up with countermeasures. There are some of the things that you have to consider in addition. The cloud storage and zero trust and the cloud, cloud storage has been covered by previous speaker. Zero trust, that means all the access to load, the given principle is that we don't trust as a default unless there is a trust verifiable evidence. So as a My Data operator, in order to maintain the My Data, that means the zero trust will definitely help us improve our security. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. We all know about My Data. It's about lump sum, a lot of individual users' data is concentrated to the operator. So My Data is really about the confidence or trust of the users that their data will not be abused. So My Data's strategy holds greater importance in this context. And we were able to learn about various security strategies to ensure such individual data security. Thank you for that. Now we have about 5 minutes. And it's very close to lunchtime. It'll be great if we can take questions from the floor. Raise your hand if you have a question.
없으신가요?
If not, maybe because we're approaching lunchtime, no one would like to ask a question. Anyways, thank you very much for the presentations. All the presenters related to data platform, digital platform, data security was such useful and helpful remarks by all three presenters. Let's conclude the session. Let me deliver my microphone to the moderator,
네, 유익한
MC.
내용으로
Thank you.
발표를 해주신
Yes,
발표자분들
I would like to thank all the presenters and moderator
부탁드리겠습니다.
for your excellent contribution. Thank you, and let's give another round of applause.
네, 그럼 저희 14시 30분이 되었기 때문에
Now it's 2:30 p.m. KST, so we are going to begin our second session of track A. I hope you enjoyed your lunch break.
오후 시간을 시작하기
And
앞서
before we begin the afternoon session, I would like to make one announcement.
모든 프로그램 종료 후 트랙 B
After every program is over, we're going to have a draw. We are going to give out 4 iPads and Galaxy Watches as well. So I would like to ask you to all stay until the end of this event and participate in the draw event. And I think you can apply for this at 3 p.m. this afternoon
그러면은 트랙
at the lobby
A
info
두 번째
desk.
세션을
Okay, then without further
가장
ado,
먼저
let me
주실
invite
강유성 실장님께
Director
박수를
Yoo-sung Kang,
부탁드리겠습니다.
who's going to moderate the second session of track A.
예, 먼저
Hello, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the Convergent Security session. The first presentation is going to be delivered by Dr. Lim Jong-bin at the Korea Space Policy Research Center, and his presentation is going to be on a new challenges in cybersecurity, space cybersecurity. Ladies and gentlemen, let's invite him with a big hand.
네, 안녕하십니까. 방금
Hello
소개받은
everyone,
국가
my name is
국제연구센터의
Jong-bin Lim
임종빈이라고
at the
합니다.
Korea Space Policy
제가 이런
Research
그
Center
보안,
as
안보,
introduced.
사이버 안보 쪽에서 오는 건 처음입니다.
I think this is my first time joining the cyber security conference. I majored in space policy and space industry. So I would say I can call myself an expert in the space industry. And today I would like to take this opportunity to share some trends and status of the industry. I think space is definitely trending, including against the backdrop of the successful launch of Nuri. And I believe that the space is going to be something that we need to for sure take care of when it comes to national development strategies. And also, there are some implications in daily life. We need to put more focus on cybersecurity and space security. So these two trending and growing industries are now being discussed in this international conference. We need to pinpoint some of the hot topics and issues that we will have to take care in the future. So please note that factor. And as you can see from my table of contents, I'm going to tell you how we are expanding the utilization of the space, and we will also emphasize the importance of space security and cyber threats. And I will also like to mention some trends of how cybersecurity in the space is getting more important and how we differentiated our approaches about the space cybersecurity. Now let's move on to the first agenda, which is how we expanded the utilization of the space. There could be many different implications. In the past, only a few people have traveled to the space, but in the future, I think many of us will be able to travel to the space, like a friend who's here or acquaintance or your family member. There will be much more expanded activities to be utilized in the future. And because many of you are not so familiar with the space, let me give you an explanation. There are orbits, and we call low orbit, which is around 50 kilometers from us, and then middle orbit is somewhere 100 kilometers away from us, and then there's the moon area and also the Mars area. And currently, humanity is exploring somewhere between the suborbit and the low orbit. As you can see, the International Space stop is located near suborbit. We have about 5 to 6 people residing there. And last year, Space as an Orbital Science launched some news about how they are going to offer commercial travels all the way to suborbit. And I think these activities are going to grow in terms of number, and we should be able to maybe have some space tours in the future. And if you think of SpaceX, they recently is working on developing a rocket launcher, and yesterday they failed in this experiment, but I think they will continue to try to achieve their goal. I would say their final goal is to come up with a rocket that's similar to airplanes that we board all the time, and they will offer continental travels. So, for example, if we have to go to the US, we have to be on a plane for 14 hours or so, but if you use a rocket, then it'll only take 1 hour, and SpaceX has a plan and ambition to implement continental travels using rocket and the space. And NASA is also focusing on installing lunar gateways so that we can have a stop in the moon. We're going to have people live there, reside there, and they will be able to engage in many science and technological activities and experiments. In the long term, we're going to have Mars as a colony so that multiple human beings can reside and live there. That's our long-term ambition. As you can see, more and more activities are going to come along, and of course, to tackle this, we need to think about our security. This is something humanity has never experienced. As a result, we need a new protocol, new security solution, and other measures. In addition, I'm sure you have heard this a lot, but there's a trend called new space. In the past, when you recall old space, this is a space where just a few nations and corporate space and officials were involved, whereas now the new space is offering different business models, different incorporations are coming in and jumping in, and as a result, new markets are being created. In that sense, space tours or space stops, or in the long term, space mining, establishing space corporations, and also a space waste disposal system. These are all the options that are being mentioned, and we are coming up with response strategies. At the same time, cybersecurity issues have to be dealt with and handled. In that sense, I believe that space is getting bigger and being applied to different business models, and as a result, relevant security security issues are coming up and rising. We need to secure measures to cooperate with those challenges.
이건 가장 근접해 있는 이슈 중에 하나라고 볼 수 있는데.
And I think this is something that is approaching us, the emergence of space internet. Some incorporations were able to use the space internet in the past, but now SpaceX, Starlink, or OneApp's low orbit satellite system is creating the space internet. So what does that mean? That means in the low orbit area, thousands of satellites are going to be placed there and provide internet services. In the past, the halted orbit was offering the internet, and this was 30,000 kilometers away from us. So this is why there was a limit when it comes to the internet speed. But if we are going to install these satellites along the low orbit trajectory, then we can expedite the internet speed much higher. So the internet that we are using physically, we will be able to use our internet service out in the space, and that is why some corporations are making investment related to this area. And I can tell you that new businesses, space businesses, are being born. If this becomes a commonality and be commercialized, we will be able to use a space mobile carrier to use our smartphones. And if that happens, I think the smartphones that we will use in the space, basically you can use it anywhere. In the middle of Pacific Ocean and on the top of the Himalayan mountain. That's the characteristics of the space technologies. Sometimes we can't use our phones, like in the plane or in remote areas. If you have climbed up to Paektu Mountain, you wouldn't be able to use it. But for the space internet, once you subscribe or sign up for a service, you'll be able to use anywhere around the globe. And when this becomes a reality, I believe that a new market that we have never experienced before can be launched. Currently, we say there are about 7.5 billion population in the world, and only 50% of the people are using the internet. Maybe it's a financial issue, maybe a geographical issue, or hampering them from accessing the internet service. But if the space internet era opens, then everyone can be the target and subject for the internet user. And as a result, I believe if that happens, cyberspace security is going to be more important, and we need to be ready for that. As I mentioned earlier, I think space security is becoming more critical. In the past, when we say space security, I believe we always thought about national security and defense systems. But when we recall the recent space security, it's more like a public domain. Civil and private security and defense or national security areas are all combined as to define space security. So when we say space security, we include civil actors and also defense actors. Especially the space, we call it has a dual usage. Both civil and public actors use the space together. And I think the range of coverage is becoming larger and larger. As a result, if we're going to offer a space tour, there are many different security protocols that we have to follow to fly a plane. Just like how we are going to fly a rocket to the space, we will have to come up with new protocols to apply and to comply with. Currently, last year, every 3 days, rocket launchers were flown into the space. But if it becomes more common, I believe there will be dozens of launches every single day, and there could be some security or safety issues. And as a result, we need to design a security protocol, and that's more of the public side. If we're going to move on to the defense side, I think in the past, it was more for defense, defending purposes. For national national defense, we focused on securing space assets. That was the main framework. For example, for military activities, of course, we need communications technology, and as a result, we will create communications technologies. We will have a monitoring satellite to identify some suspicious activities of the enemies. But now we are saying, because more and more people are going to use space resources, we have to protect the space and we have to maintain the order, peaceful order of the space. In that sense, space is also a space where operations are available, just like how we have army forces and air forces and naval forces on each territory. People have been saying that we need space forces to protect our space area, and as a result, some countries are focusing on building space forces, and French and the U.S. Military authorities have created space forces as a result. And you can see the trend of space security being strengthened. When we say space, that means something has to be flying and floating around. There has to be a satellite in order for us to be able to utilize the space. And then because of the technology, there could be many available services on Earth. That means we have to assume that there is a space system. But the problem is the space system itself entails a system between the space and the land, and it has to have wireless communications. Because it's floating in the space, if you want to control it for frequency or links, those are not the only methodologies we can use. It's already exposed to cybersecurity threats and attacks. We have to be able to control everything remotely. And of course, there are existing solutions, but I believe that new security protocols will have to come up and will be strengthened as a result. And let me share with you one case study. There are different types of cyber threats against the space system. You can see the data fetching or monitoring is being done. Data safety infringement is being done. And they also dominate the control as well. I'll give you one example of a satellite. Let's say we are going to have a satellite that film images or videos, and a hacker would go there and then would take the data away or monitor what kind of videos are being filmed. Or you can also infringe or ruin the data so that it's no longer usable. And I would say the most scary thing is to being taken away of the control of the satellite so that we can no longer use the satellite itself forever. And these are actually being done at this very moment. For example, there was a cyber attack against the space system back in 1988. There was a science satellite called ROSAT made by Germany and the US in the 1990s. And Russian hackers stole this satellite, and the two countries had to lose data, and the data was manipulated by Russian hackers. There's another case study called Lancet 7. And as you can see, for a certain amount of time, the control was lost to hackers. And what's bigger issue is a Terra EOS AM-1 in 2008. As I said, the access control was stolen. There was not an issue, but the fact that the satellite control was not available by the developers and inventors was a main issue. So there are ongoing attacks against space facilities, and there are ongoing and existing problems. As I said, and as you probably already know, in the past, only a very minor people have used space facilities, nations, researchers and universities, whatnot. But now, if the space system becomes something that's common, that's easily used in daily lives, I think the amount of attacks is going to grow. As I mentioned earlier, if you think about the nature of space system, we transact links to give controls. So from its nature itself, it's going to be vulnerable, and as a result, we need to heighten the security level. And also, users, even though they have used links between a limited number of stakeholders, but because more and more people are going to utilize the service, I believe risks are going to increase. Let me give you one example, and I think it would be the similar route that hackers currently use. So in general, if you look at the big picture, when you're going to operate a space system, we have a land ground station computer and the space computer. So hackers would use their personal computer or phone, and then they would go to the lab server. And for the ground station computer, it's a separate independent web that it has compared to other web servers, but they can link and connect the ground computer server to regular web server, and then they can install malicious codes. And as this ground station computer updates by communicating with payload computer in the space, they can all be connected with the communication system and just take away and rob the satellite. And according to this flow, the hackers can just steal the system and have control over the machine. And I believe this is the regular pathway that they would take to attack space systems. So recently, in the past, let's say just one satellite is stolen, we incur damage. But recently, what is more problematic is that multiple satellites are all connected and linked together. As I mentioned in the earlier part of my presentation, when you're going to create a space system, we may have a network connecting thousands or tens of thousands of satellites. And if one satellite is being stolen, then because there is connection with the other satellites, all those satellites, because they're also connected to ground stations and ground facilities, all the domino effect is going to be there, and it could hamper socio-economic systems that we have in place. So we are aware of this problem. Maybe I'm repeating myself, but as you can see, if you look at our current society, we're using the 5G network system. But in the future, we might be able to use 6G so that all social connections, economic connections are available. I think what's important is the space system in the piece of 6G. Air, ground, sea will be all connected through the space, because air, land, sea, we have our own nation's sovereign territories, whereas the space is communal. It shifts and it rotates, so it's impossible to place borders between nations. This is a common resource where every nation would have access to. And also in the space, at the same time, we can access all land, sea, and air of individual country. As a result, the space is going to play the central role as a hub, and once all things are connected by the space or via the space, everything will be wireless communication, and as a result, we should look at it as a cybersecurity element. Let's say one satellite is hacked, and if it was threatened, then all networks related to that will be accessible by the hacker, and we should have a system and think hard and contemplate before this era comes. So as I mentioned earlier, public systems are now being changed, and as a result, cybersecurity threats are being heightened. And from defense perspective, as I said earlier, in the past, when you say defense or space, we only thought about securing relevant assets for national defense. But now we're trying to protect the space, and we are trying to make the space a more safe environment. And in addition to that, to protect national system, that means someone is attacking our national defense system. People would attack space facilities and satellites, and we need to have response measures for that. And it's not just a physical attack, it's more like spoofing or jamming attacking methodologies. And cybersecurity elements are all intertwined in this jamming and spoofing attacks. And as I mentioned earlier, once a satellite is stolen because of hacking, then that stolen satellite would attack a satellite right next to it, and we need a security and defense system for that. And I believe that in the future, because of instead of operating a few number of space systems, we will be operating a number of systems in the future, and that is why space security is more important. We have to monitor space assets and facilities. We have to start building protocols related to space security. So in that sense, as the space enlarges and as cyber security elements are becoming more important, not just public area but national defense area are facing threats, then what kind of responses or measures should we develop? As I shared earlier in the beginning part of my presentation, I think, of course, space is something that we should look at long term, and people are interested in that. We can create a new society with the utilization of 6G network, and we can also think about future growth engines, which is the space, how we are going to successfully expand the usage of the space. And this expansion is already available. And in 2010, the U.S. declared their space policy. And if you look at the declaration, it says the space system should build and design cybersecurity. Advanced nations have already set this under their protocol and guidelines. So this is what we should aim for. They are declaring basic principles and guidelines, and according to the guidelines, they develop space systems and satellites. Security, cybersecurity, and hardware and software are all mentioned in the guideline. It says we need to create a system and share the system with private companies. And because private companies are interested in actively utilizing the space, it says we have to create a security protocol, and we should provide education and trainings and systemize the training to corporate world. If you look at what Europe is doing, in Europe there's European Space Agency. We called ICIS, and they also have the European Defense Agency called EDA, and these two organizations are working together. ESA was focusing on public utilization. EDA was focused more on the defense of the European Union. But now these two organizations are working together. So if you look at what they're doing, because border-related cooperation is increasing, they say that they need close monitoring of cybersecurity threats and attacks, and they strengthen the ties to jointly handle cyber threats, and protocols and directions are all set with the collaboration of academia and corporate companies. I can't say it was just born, but I feel like as of late, space-related cybersecurity threats are being mentioned, and people are more concerned and interested in terms of tackling this issue. Beyond what we have been recognizing them as defense assets, we are now trying to utilize it in a larger range. Sorry, this is not moving. I have one page left. Yeah, it works. Thank you.
그래서 아까 말씀드렸듯이
So
기존의
as I
우주
said
시스템도
earlier,
사이버 안보나
the
보안
space
쪽의
system in the
측면에서
past
굉장히
was
고려를 많이
important.
했습니다.
We
측면은
put critical
아마
importance in that,
위성과 지상
in
우주과
managing
연결성에
satellites and ground
대해서만 되게
stations.
고려를 많이
But I feel like we
했었던
only
거고요.
focused on the communication between satellites and ground stations. But in the future, not just the communication or connection between satellites and ground stations, we have to take care of the connection between satellites and satellites, as well as users and satellites. We need to create strategies regarding 3 different areas. And as I said, in the future, space systems are going to be connected to a wide array of infrastructure, like roads and airports and all sorts. So we need to come up with different protocols to deal with individual areas. One example would be creating social infrastructure, security hardware and software have to be applied even during from the research and development stage. And if there is an existing national system about cyber security, then it should not be targeting just land, ground, or sea. We should definitely include space as a possible area of control and monitoring. So now we need to look up instead of just gazing at our ground level of facility and system. This is everything from my side. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. Dr. Lim, is there any question from the floor? Maybe we have time for 2 questions. Any questions from the floor? Please raise your hand and ask a question. Thank you. If there is no question from the floor, I would like to ask my questions. 2 quick questions. Number 1, I see that there are a lot of young students in the floor, and because of that, space policy or space science, in order to maintain research activities in terms of space, let's say there are college students or grad students, what would be a promising area? What should they focus on when it comes to their studying?
저도 우주만
Well,
가봤던 사람으로서
as a person who has been only looking at the space, I do not have much experience in cybersecurity. But as I mentioned during my presentation, I think space internet is something that's a very important direction. So when you say space internet, you know, SpaceX is only providing service in a limited number of areas. This is not something that's commonly available, but I feel like in the near future, this is going to be the norm. And I think young students in 4 to 5 years, when you are starting your career, if you can start at building your career, I think you should definitely focus on space internet, because in the past, space internet was available to a few selected officials, but once space internet era begins, everyone here, every individual will have access to space internet. All smartphone security protocols are different and vary. I don't know specific technologies, but hacking prevention or hacking control or algorithm services are going to be needed. And as a result, I would like to tell all of you, maybe focus on studying security protocols for space internet. Thank you very much. Because of time limits, I'm going to conclude the first presentation of session 2, track A. Let's give him a big hand.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
This is the last presentation of the conversion security, and the last presentation is going to be on maritime, moving on from space and autonomous driving. The third and last presenter is going to be Professor Chang-won Kim from Daegu University. He's going to deliver his presentation titled Major Issues and Cybersecurity of industry and culture. As introduced, my name is Chang-won Kim from Daegu University. I would like to thank first the organizer for arranging today's conference. I think what's interesting is that we started our journey from space and then onto land, and then now it's time for the ocean. So first, if you look at what I have prepared today, there are about 120 slides. So I think you can just look at it at your convenience when you have more time. Today I'm going to focus on what's interesting and trending. The reason why people are focusing more on maritime security is because once an accident happens, then the aftermath or loss is huge. The previous presenters focused on attacks, but I think I would like to focus more on the defense side in order to fundamentally block those attacks from the beginning. So even though it looks like it's a big presentation, I think my gist is as follows. First and foremost, we have to make sure that there's no internal whistleblowing or data leakage, and I think visualization technologies is very important when it comes to that. Because from remote areas, if you extract it, it's data. But if you do virtualization, it's an image. And there's a limitation, clear limitation about utilizing virtualized data to get what's useful. There are many different limitations in virtualized data. So if you look at my appendix, I can't give everything, but there are some experience such as window defender bypassing test or domestic VPN devices, temporary settings file defense. And if you attack these specific areas, attackers could get what they want. So you can look at the flow and specifics about it. And also, grid separation is important. Once you do grid separation, there are many different ideations about this. Let's say you separate grid, and then there's a PC, desktop, and there's Wi-Fi or USB dongle that goes in, and then there is a separate grid that you can create. So once you block that, then a person will put in two network cards. One will be external, one will be internal. So when there were some audits and inspections, one was about internal device that is using as a contact grounding zone for networking. So no matter how many times you try or what you do, there will be eventually some penetration from the outside. So I'm sure that as soon as you move data location, it just removes, deletes completely. And once you execute it, you just completely delete it. So this bypassing window attacks were done, and there was some demonstration from another organization as well. So because we give out these demonstrations, then we decided to implement the concept of zero trust so that network infrastructure should be ready for any types of attacks. So that's the overall background and philosophy. I'm going to go very quickly about my initial part of my presentation. So if you look at the value of maritime industry, especially shipbuilding and maritime, I would say this is the most lucrative business that Korea has after semiconductors. If you look at this table over here, we have maritime, port business, offshore plant, and I think the biggest would be these two, the first two. And if you look at the offshore plant, let's say we make machines, like including embedded machines. Let's say everything has a computer, and once they're hacked, unimaginable loss is going to be incurred. And let's say we are going to develop mine industry or business. Let's say an internal person would steal this information to outsiders outside the government, then a possible damage will be unimaginable and the loss is going to be great. And it's the same for O&M. So
적용하는 분야는 지금
I would say what we are focusing on, what we can apply to would be shipping, port, and maritime industry. Once we come up with smart porting and smart maritime affairs, I believe that there could be possible attacking scenarios from hackers, and we have to set up a defense system. Globally, because maritime affairs have grown, the US, the UK, different businesses are being created. And also, recently, we are digitalizing maritime businesses. That's the main focus. And if you go more specifically, not just Korea, but many other countries are focusing on different strategies. Instead of traditional shipbuilding structure, we are trying to come up with less carbon-emitting ships. So, LNG ships or eco-friendly ships, and that's going to be inter-ship network. There's going to be also autonomous ships and boats to be developed. So if we're going to go into that, of course, this is the important description and content and roadmap. And I believe that major shipbuilding companies of Korea are going to take initiation of such content that's written in the table. And you can see that if this actually becomes realized, cyber attack or security strategies and principles can be drawn. I don't know if you have heard of this organization. I also recently found this information. You know, shipbuilding companies are not party A. Ship owners are the most important and who hold the biggest power, and that's called Korean Register. These are the organizations that provide authority and ownership to ship owners. This organization gives certificates that a specific boat and ship is made properly according to guidelines and principles. So, remote control center might get the type of attacks that are written on the page over here. So let's say Korean Register gave the certificate and verification, and after the certificate, you have to be equipped with the system. IT, OT is also included, and ship network is configured this way, and there are major devices and equipment that you can see in the ship itself. Please refer to the material when you have time. I'm going to skip over some of the details.
이제 우리가 예전에 있었던 가장 최근까지
So if you look back on some of the cyber attacks and actual damage cases recently, I think other countries are facing similar challenges, but I'm going to show you one example from Korea. Maybe all the students here might think, why is the system so poorly created and managed at such a big scale of ship? But it's not quite sophisticated. This is already covered at a media article. Maybe Hyundai Globus would not like me, but it's okay because it's already disclosed information. So there was ransomware attack to Hyundai Globus, and they were not able to deload all the parcels loaded in the ship. How did that happen? So container deloaders had to utilize Excel file. It went to Japan and then it came to Korea. And they will have to look at the Excel file to see, okay, which containers are supposed to come down to the port. But because the Excel file was locked and encrypted, deloaders were not able to look at the material and data and document to get parcels down from the ship to the port. So this is one example that I can tell you. And now let's look at the network system that's used in ships. It's very similar to what you're used to. Firewall, LT switch, VSAT system, ACU, switches. And once crew go onto the boat, they have also external mobile net where they can talk to their family members and friends. And there's a separation between internal communication and external communication grids. So let's now assume that there are equipments and tools and we are controlling everything remotely. What kind of attacks are going to come in and how are these attacks going to demolish and collapse the system? So, for example, there is vector RAT, backdoor RAT is installed, then by utilizing this installation, you can access all data. You can steal all data by RAT installation. So, let's say things are not virtualized, and if the attackers get in, then it's very easy for them to get the data and steal the data. For RAT remote control, key logs or screen images can be stolen. And how do you do this? You have to if you just use the default RAT code, Windows is going to defend it. But if you decrypt the encryption and then if you access, then it will all be killed. So what you need to do is you need to make it into images and initial critical data has to be converted, and then you can just turn on this RAT installation and can steal the data. So just ignore every other detail. Just focus on VPN device. After you connect to the VPN, because of the tunneling, the internet should not work. But there's a simple settings file, configuration file, and there's redirect config file. And if you just turn that off, you can still communicate with other networks. So what happens during the first attack is that I kind of manipulated the settings file, and then I made it into read-only. Of course, you can't write it. And as a result, they can do something else and then they will be able to connect it. And if you look at the most recent versions, I'm sure if you learn about OS, there's route OBN. But originally, there is the consensus for modifying files, which is 10 microseconds. After that, a malicious code, you can just modify it, and the round road should read it, and then it'll be penetrated. So this system has a fundamental problem. Let's say you create a source code and you have to verify that it's not manipulated and that process is missing. So utilizing this route, you can definitely easily steal data from a certain system. So how do you make it easier to defend your system? I think virtualization is important. If you virtualize data, their remote transaction would be all done through images, and it's hard to take data. So net integration, net separation systems are implemented to move our security level to one notch by one notch. And instead of just using the desktop system, you can virtualize data that will help, but there are some accompanying issues tied to it. So, because we're now assuming some threats, I'm going to talk to you what possible attacks could also still be coming in after virtualization. Let's talk about that matter. So, originally, after virtualization, the internet should not be working, but if you put in the USB dongle, VPN is all penetrated and communications available. And let's say 4 different scenarios are out there. Number 1, if virtualization is set, then originally, let's say there are 2 VMs, and then from one VM to the other VM, port scanning should be available. If you go back and turn on VMs, port scanning, if you make that command, then scanning will be done. Then after that, one VM, let's say one VM is at the admin VM. Let's say I'm an employee of my company, and then if I'm going to leave my company in the future, if I want to steal all their information, then let's say admin port scanning is done, then the information can go to the other VM. That's one way to attack the system.
내가 RAT 코드를 심어가지고
So with the RAT system, from VM to VM, I can access it remotely, and that's how we can attack. And thirdly,
우리가 이제 업무 시스템이죠. 우리 올림 제어에 있어서
in the remote control, there is the operating system. There's the admin VM, and of course that VM died. So the admin's RAT system, the admin's VM IP address can be found. So from my VM to admin's VM, I change the address, then I can access the server that can connect to the final destination. So if you apply all these, the VMware and this virtualized solution, all these attacks are valid. So we try to prevent this. There are many solutions. IPS, IDS are almost outdated. VPN equipment, NSA, NSN authentication software, these are all neutralized. So we have to go back to the basics. Then one of the downfalls of this equipment is that all the security equipment that are out there, at the alpha level, they do the connection first, and at the application level, they verify the access at the application level, and that is why all these problems arise. So at the TCP level, we apply the zero trust, and then we have to decide whether or not the network connection will be made, and we can block it there. Then we will be able to block these attacks that I was talking about. So based on the border-based security, there's a zero trust concept. Most of you and most general people don't understand this as a technology, but it's not a technology. It's about a philosophy. It's about architecture. So the boundary-based security is that if you cross the line, then we trust that person once that person crossed the line from outside. And as long as that person is authenticated outside and comes in, then that person can do anything within that boundary. But zero trust means that even if the person is inside that boundary, through microsegmentation, there's one more step further and to enhance the security. For example, you know, girls don't like when their parents come into their room. So the father will come to the apartment. So the traditional single perimeter defense is like, if I just open the door of my house, then the father will be able to open up all the doors and look into the kids' rooms. But the father comes in, and then with the zero trust, then even if the father comes into home, then he won't. But then he still won't be able to open the door of his kids. So it's like there are three-level security: the apartment level, and the house level, and also the room level. So that is the zero trust defense. If you look at the list, the zero trust architecture, there's PDP, policy decision point, and at local there's the agents, and before the assets that we have to protect, there is a PP gateway. So these between the policy administrator, these two work with each other to authenticate. It's based on a whitelist, so that means if there's a command, and on this PC there's local PP, and this PP. This particular application with ID and password, when that user is authenticated with a set of ID and password, can go through to the gateway. And that is the philosophy behind the zero trust. I'm going to have to skip around, but it'll be great if you can ask me a question afterwards or email me so I can answer your questions. So once that the architecture is set up, just how it was structured in the maritime, and if we apply the zero trust, some of the fundamental problems that we saw before, then we can address these. And if we virtualize this, then this is the structure that we can make. If we don't do that, then so we do this type of virtualization, and this is the user. They come into the control center here, and the control center is connected to the ship. Then there can be various attack scenarios. First is remotely. VM can be infected remotely, so that's one scenario. And here, if you do that, the policy can be blocked. But here, previously, just how so this is one of the four scenarios that I was talking about. Here, the hacker's right here, and the hacker infects this PC and then gets inside. And then once this user is hijacked, then here this VM, all these VMs within this boundary can be infected by malicious code. And ID and password can be hijacked. And then this VMware, to this VMware, you can connect remotely, and when this VM dies, then you can use the password and ID hijacked and get into this area, and then this user can only go to working server 1, but you can now go to the working server 2. So this was the scenario that we came up with. And last year in my research lab, we got this equipment installed, and PDP controller, local gateway, PC. We have 40 PCs, and 20 is the internal and 20 are external. And since this lab is in university, and we want to make sure that we didn't want to use the university network, so we put the dongles in the external PCs to create an internet. And then here, IPS VPNs switch, VMware servers. This is how our lab is composed. And these are sponsored by corporate partners here. And now we made this following the zero trust philosophy, and this became one of the recommended products. And this is the attack scenario that has executed. And how, just like I said, it's the local VP, and then we went to we got in, and if you use this scenario, then these attacks can be prevented and blocked. Here, through port scan, you can hijack and port scanning. This is being blocked. Here, from this VM to that VM, the remote access was tested, and we verified that it was possible. And from outside net, if you go through VPN, the internet should not work. But let's say I'm the hacker, and I put in the dongle here, and then we found out that it's actually possible to access internet. And this attack can be quite dangerous, because here administrator doesn't do anything, and I bring the IP address, and then I use his address, and I access it as his address, and these are all blocked. And internally also, the conventional desktop does not allow this direction, but if I hijack this, then within our institutions, we were able to access any computer within our institution. And the Window Defender,
전반적인 시나리오들이
bypass
이쪽은
scenario,
이쪽들이
these
굉장히
codes
실제로는 굉장히 까다롭습니다.
are very difficult to make
이렇게
actually.
시도해보면
So if you run
이번에까지
this,
윈도우 디펜더가
just a couple of days ago, the window defender was not able to detect anything, and remotely the key logs were able to hijack.
또이 윈도우 디펜더는 또 패치가 되면 또 언제 바뀔지 모릅니다.
Window, when there's a patch, then you have to penetrate it again. And in Korean, VPN product has been penetrated
핵심은
also.
뭐냐면
Now, the key takeaway here is that when you do the computing, the setup files can be written and we can manipulate the writing, then the internet is connected. The recent version was hard to penetrate, but then I put in write, and then I saw that they erased it. And we use the PowerCell in the window, and when the file changes, then there's the API that detects the change. And then that will detect that change, and OS as round-robin policy vulnerability was exploited, and that's how we attacked, and this is a PowerShell code. And this is open, so you can use it if you want, and this is how it works. So the network has been connected. Well, this concludes my presentation, and I'd like to take your questions. Yeah, so if you have any question, we can entertain one question.
질문이 없으시면 제가 마지막으로 그냥 한 가지만 간단하게.
Then I would like to ask you a very simple question. Well, we went through some of the attack scenarios and cases. When you were developing these, then what about defense?
디펜더 우회나 VPN
Bypassing defender or VPN
공격하신 이 내용들에
attack.
방어도 동시에 개발하고 계십니까?
Are you developing defensive measures in parallel? Yes. We found out that these are all defendable using zero trust. The core idea of zero trust is that the local agents that we deploy and the gateway before the asset that we have to protect and our policy and controller that are in between, and that's the composition of the picture. And here, mostly, let me give you one more example for Defender. Here, we change the IP address to access it. Now, changing the IP address and access it, then all around the world, there's no security solution that works like this. And malicious code or access control, with the malicious code, whenever there's new one, we can't just keep on blocking all the new ones. And NSC also blocks the IP in a higher level. So if you change the IP address and you get in, there's no way that we can block it. But on local PEP, for example, when you set it up from the beginning, say, this computer is number one. If this is set up as another address, then at the command level, the communication itself is blocked by our software. So when you install this, say, okay, you only can handle one, and you can just write the policy like that. Then when the address is changed to 2, then of course the communication will be blocked. And that is the zero trust policy that is being utilized. Thank you very much for your answer. And thank you very much, Professor Kim Chang-ho, for your insightful presentation on maritime security. Thank you very much. This concludes the last session of convergent security. Thank you very much, and I would like to hand over the mic to the MC. Thank you very much for the interesting presenters, 3 presenters. Thank you very much, and let's give it up for our moderator also. With that, I would like to conclude the Track A Session 2. Thank you very much for joining us for the International Conference on Information Security 2022. And we also thank the organizer as well as the participants. While listening to the presentations on those cybersecurity, and it was a great opportunity that we are reminded of the importance of the information security. Thank you very much for sticking with us until the end. Thank you.
마지막으로 한 가지 더 공지할 게 있는데요.
There's an announcement to make. There's a
회원권 추첨이
lucky draw for those who are here today. So if you move to the track B, then you'll be able to participate in the lucky draw.
비트랙으로 이동 부탁드리겠습니다.
Yes, please. Thank you.